The More of Us podcast features real, uncut conversations about life, pastoral ministry, and walking with Jesus. All guests are pastors in the Charis Fellowship, bound by our common commitment to biblical truth, relationship, and mission. We trust as you hear more of us, you'll see Christ among us.
Welcome. This is Dr. Lambert at the Grace College and Seminary podcast room, and I'm with Pastor Tim Sprinkle.
Hello.
And today we have a special guest with us, Keith Menier, Pastor Keith Menier from Columbus, Ohio, and he's here in the room. Welcome, Pastor Keith.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
You've had a long day already. Thank you for being with us here in the podcast room.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Keith Menier is the lead pastor of the Grace Fellowship, a multi-site church in Columbus, Ohio. Since leaving his career as a chemist, Keith has led the church through a significant movement of God. Grace has grown from a community of 70 to over 6,000 during his time in leadership. Keith is a passionate and skilled communicator and has had the opportunity to teach and preach all over the country. Keith is also an excellent organizational leader who really enjoys raising up and developing leaders and seeing those leaders thrive. Tim, that sounds right up our alley.
Yeah.
Keith has served on multiple boards and leadership teams over the years in a variety of capacities and currently sits on the trustee board for Grace College and Seminary in Winona Lake, Indiana. Keith is married to Kelly and they have 4 children, Caden, Kaya, Cooper, and Camille. He loves spending time with his family, golfing, fishing, watching sports, water skiing, and traveling. To see new spots on the globe is also on his list. Once again, welcome, Keith.
Thanks.
Keith, I'm glad to sit at the table with you. I've been in lots of different settings in the Charis Fellowship with you at different conferences, Momentum Pro, and I've always had my notebook open. And I noticed today, as you were speaking at the Thriving Centers Leaders, you often have this notebook too. And I wonder, it's filled with gold. It feels like you're always sharing things that you've learned at different settings that you've been in. And I've appreciated that. I've written down a lot of thoughts from you, but I'm wondering, what would that go for if you if I got it and tried to sell it on eBay? What do you think that would go for?
It all is going to depend a lot on the audience. I'm going to say not more than about $10.
Okay. I don't know if that's like inseparable, like you sleep with that.
No. It goes in my backpack a lot of places, and I've got a pretty good library of them. I mean, there's probably 5 in there right now. So you saw a couple of them today, but there's a filing cabinet of them somewhere.
I was thinking of like the Indiana Jones movie, right? That sacred book. It's got the maps in it. Yeah.
Yes. Well, one of the things you talked about today, and we'll cover more of your story and your family and your walk with Jesus as we go through this conversation, but sharing from the overflow, you can't give what you don't have. And one of the things I've always appreciated about you, Keith, is that when you stand in front of a group of people, whether you're speaking at conference, I've been at youth conference where you've spoke, I've been at Momentum Pro, and then today's event, is you seem to be constantly taking in information, processing information, practicing that information in your congregation, and then sharing it with others. So I just feel like you are drinking from the stream always, and then you have a way of distilling it in ways that are helpful to people. So thank you for doing that. It's a gift to our fellowship and a gift to your church.
Thanks.
And we're looking forward to this conversation with you today.
Great.
Well, Keith, looking at this list, it looks like you might pastor sometimes, but it looks like you have a lot of hobbies. Out of those, what's your favorite?
Yeah, the passion I have these days is golf.
Yeah.
It used to be, I was a college basketball player and loved basketball and loved sports in general, but golf has become a giant respite for me. It's become recharging, but also competitive, and used to hate it because I don't like to do things that I'm not good at. But I made a decision a number of years ago to say, look, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to compete against me. And then I got good enough to where I could start playing against some other people, but I just love golf. Enjoy it. Do my best to try to play once a week when I can, and if I'm able to more, but love it.
Have you golfed with our Old Testament prophet Tiberius Ratza?
I have not. I've not had the pleasure.
The assassin.
Yeah, pretty solid.
That's his nickname, the assassin.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, that's funny. Well, in an interview we had with Matt Wheelock, I said, you gotta golf with Matt Wheelock just because it makes you feel better about yourself, watching his balls go off to the left and right. No, but Matt will pay for you too with Inspire.
Do you golf?
A little bit.
What's sad is I actually think the second one on the list would probably be fishing, which if at this point in my life I'm saying golfing and fishing, I think it's an indictment on full middle-agedness.
Yes.
Like,
Well, I was hanging out with a bunch of middle-aged guys the other day. I was like, you guys want to join my club? It's called the Middle-Aged Milers. We're just going to get together once a week and see if we could go a couple miles, like jogging.
fair enough.
Right? Trying to keep that soft belly,
You know, you and I go to the Y, Tim, and a lot of times I look around, and I used to be the youngest one there, and now I'm not the youngest one there anymore.
But we're growing in wisdom.
We're growing in wisdom.
Stature, and hopefully favor with God and others, right?
Amen to that.
Tell us a little bit about your family. We did read names. Everybody starts with a K, but
Yeah.
can you tell us a little more?
Yeah, so married to my wife, Kelly. We met college age and got married a few years out of college, moved to Columbus, and we've been in Columbus, Ohio ever since. And
Go Bucks.
yeah,
Can we
go
say that?
Bucks.
Go Bucks.
Okay.
Yeah, very much go Bucks, but it's been a little bit of a rough go recently, but we'll come out of it. So Kel and we got married in 2001, so we're on the way of 22, almost 23 years of marriage, and then we have 4 kids. My oldest son is a senior in high school, Caden, and then I have a daughter, Kaya, who is 15 and a half. We're in the temps driving learning with her right now, and then I actually have boy-girl twins, who Cammie and Coop, who are 9, and so very active. My oldest plays basketball and soccer. My middle daughter is a very good tennis player. Cooper plays basketball and soccer, and then Cammie dances. And Kelly and I just try to keep the train on the tracks. So super blessed, amazing, godly woman. My children love the Lord. They're annoying but joyful and fun, and all the things kids are supposed to be. So really, really blessed to have a great family.
So basically, you're a full-time tailgater.
Yeah, sure. I definitely have chairs in the back of my vehicle for the games that I need to unfold to be at. So
Not only do we have chairs, we have different kinds of chairs based upon the setting. We have waterproof chairs, we have comfy chairs for the grass, and then we got those cushiony chairs that you can put on bleachers. So we're set for every environment.
there you go.
Marriage is not easy, knowing Jesus or not knowing Jesus. Marriage is not easy, pastoring or non-pastoring, and, pastoring even adds some more difficulties with that because sometimes as pastors, we have the hard time saying no. Keith, how do you keep your marriage healthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think first it begins with my personal relationship with the Lord being healthy. It's really hard to honor my wife, love my wife the way Jesus wants me to when I'm not in a good place. And so I think the first thing to my marriage is taking care of my own relationship with the Lord. And then in terms of like the blocking and tackling, the week in, week out stuff, there's the normal things that we would kind of all say, right? Like date night and keep a short account of wrongs and quick to forgive and all of those kind of things. I think a couple rhythms that have been really good for Kelly and I. One is we've, for a number of years now, had an annual getaway, no kids. We've done it with another couple for a number of years. It used to just be us, but we've added a good ministry couple friend. But that's been a real blessing for us every single year to be able to go do that. And we've done that for a number of years. And then I think this is maybe weird, but Kel and I, we like food, and a good meal that's either made or gone out to. We've just learned to enjoy that for what it is. I think another thing that just keeps our marriage healthy is to recognize the things that we do, whether you want to say have to or responsible to with our kids. How do we make the most of those together? So just recently, our son had a really good game, and I tried to celebrate that with her as much as I tried to celebrate that with him. And so the things that you're going to be committed to in this season with kids, how do you make the most out of those together? So
true.
A lot of people in marriage, they want to know, do you read the Bible together? Do you pray together? Do you do devotions together? And I always tell people they got to find their rhythm, not, my rhythm, and I shouldn't try to do yours. My wife would hate reading a book with me. She didn't want to read a book with me. She didn't want to read the Bible with me. We pray together. But I think the biggest thing with that is that we have spiritual conversation and we check on each other more than we have some regiment that we've both leaned into. That would probably be more divisive than it would be healthy based on the way we're wired. So, and then I think the other thing that helps our marriage healthy is we believe in what we're giving our lives to in our church. And so I think being able to both look and go, we feel like the price tag of what this does cost our family is worth it. If one of us felt that way, I think it would be really hard. But the fact that both of us feel that way, I've made it pretty easy.
When you talk about not having like a specific devotional time, but just having regular conversations, I've had my wife ask before, are you preaching to me right now? Are you pastoring? Have you ever had that happen?
Yeah, I mean, Kel will say, don't use your quotes on me. I'm not one of your congregants. I don't work for you.
I've heard that too.
Your superpower's not going to be good here.
Tricks.
Yeah, and I've just learned really clearly, like, pray with your wife, not at your wife. Yeah. Pray with your kids, not at your kids. So, but yes, I have been accused before of quoting the pastor.
Keith, what you said is simple, but I think you just set a lot of ministry leaders free.
Yeah,
that comment that it doesn't have to be pigeonholed into a certain kind of devotion period.
Yeah, I've found even in marriage counseling, people will ask me, and they'll want me to like formulaically give them what Kelly and I do to prescribe that upon them, and I'll say that's not a good idea. Every marriage is different, every couple's different, every personality's different. You need to figure out what's going to work for you guys. You should be having spiritual conversations, and you should know how each other are doing spiritually, but you don't have to do what we do. Yeah.
The question that my wife and I ask each other occasionally for the check-in is just like, not how are you doing? We all ask that all the time, but like, how's your soul? And that's a check-in question that we've used to get a little bit deeper at.
Sure.
But however you frame that, it's important for married couples to have those conversations.
I would like to have a little cutback on a book title, though, if you write a book, because I'm very fascinated about the words you used on marriage, blocking and tackling. That's a book, man.
Yeah, man.
Speaking of books, I'm sure you read heavily, you listen to a lot of podcasts. If you could maybe even look back over 2023 and say, what was one or two books or a podcast that you discovered in 2023? We're here at the beginning of 2024 to timestamp this, that you'd say, I'm so glad I read that. So just give us one or two titles.
Yeah, I read a book called The Great Dechurching. Okay. And that was a book that it's a lot of data, but it's also some insight to the data. So it's not simply just the information. It also gives some thoughts on what to do with it about the 40 million people that have left the church in the last 25 years in North America. And that was thought-provoking and engaging. I mentioned that my wife and I go away every year, and on that I always read a different type of book than I normally read. It's normally a biography or a kind of a building of a business story. And this past year, it was on the original CEO of Netflix and the building of Netflix. And I think those stories always remind me of vision and hustle and passion and sacrifice and grit. And so that was another book where it was inspiring and also confirming of some realities. Podcasts and authors and sermons in general are hard for me to say this is who I love, because I really try to diversify and listen to people who disagree with me. I think this past year, a podcast that I discovered was a podcast called Mere Christians. It's done by a guy named Jordan Rayner. Jordan actually spoke at Momentum Conference this past year, and the premise of the podcast is mere Christians, regular Christians who live their life and try to do it for the glory of God. And he's had people like Artie Sikora from the Food Network, Francis Collins, Candace Bure, Emmanuel Acho, so some celebrity types. But then he's had pastors and kind of the guy who works at Trader Joe's. And all of it is about when you're not a professional Christian, how do you live out your faith? And it's been good. There's been some really, I think, great takeaways and thoughts, even some things to think about in preaching and to be reminded of what people are living out. And so I wasn't aware of that podcast going into this year, and it's been great. A podcast that I think appropriately tweaks me on a regular basis is a podcast called The Holy Post.
Okay.
And I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it's Phil Vischer, who was the VeggieTales guy, and then Skye Jitani. And Skye's had lots of different things. He's been a pastor and an author. And there's enough of what they say where I'm like, I kind of want to fight them. But then there's also enough of what they say where I'm like, why do I want to fight them? Do I know what I really believe? And how would I talk about that and get after that? And so they've been someone that's pushed me, and I lean into their stuff quite a bit as well.
Great, thanks.
Let's transition here and let's talk about some ministry. You have seen significant growth in your ministry and church. Talk to us about some of the growing pains you've experienced at Grace Fellowship.
Yeah, I mean, that's a long list.
It is.
The growing pains are both personal and professional. Personal in the personal/professional crossover of changing the job that you thought you had. You know, I thought I was a pastor of people. In a lot of ways now I lead an organization and I preach. And that is a growing pain. Probably, though, the biggest growing pains are staff. I had a pastor friend of mine, my mentor. He said, no matter how big or small your church is, the two greatest pains you'll have in your life are your own personal family and your staff. And I've just found that to be true. It was true when the church was small. It's been true when the church is big. You have a unique relationship with staff, and then things happen. They leave. People get fired. People quit. People transition. People think things. You know the whole story that the other people don't. I think that's one of the biggest costs of leadership is you know all the details other people don't know, and you'll never get to tell them. And that's hard to go to bed at night with. So I think staff's been a hard one. Change of job description's been a hard one. And then when your church gets big, the positive side is you have a bunch of people who think you're great who've never met you. The negative side is you have a bunch of people who make a bunch of opinions about you who've never met you. I had a mentor say one time, he said, when your church gets to about 2,000, people have an opinion about you and they've never even heard you. They've never even been around you. And that happens all the time. People who think I'm amazing, I'm like, you don't have any idea what I'm like. And then you have other people who think I'm a terrible person who's minimized the truth of the gospel and I'm all about numbers because my church is big. And that's just not fun. You feel like you're on trial, kind of all the time. So those would be some of the things amidst a lot of great things.
To segue right along with that, you have also done some innovative things with church planting, multiplication. Talk to us about that multi-site thing you're doing.
Yeah. So we're a church that's 5 locations now. When I got there, one small church, grown. We've done we went to multi-services and built buildings and campaigns. And years ago, I heard and read a stat, both in different formats, that the success rate of church planting is quite low, but the success of campusing was quite high. And they were different forms. I'm for both of them, but they were different forms of multiplication. And when we were looking at stewarding what we were doing, we said we think we want to multiply first, or at least primarily through campusing. And so we started to do that, and we did it with 1 and 2, and now we're up to a total of 5 campuses. And it's a way to multiply our vision, our DNA, and our reach, and to some degree minimize the risk and feel like we get a better ROI on the other side of it. So we've done that, and we've spent lots of money and time and energy and resources doing that, while we also support church planting. We've given hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've given lots of my own personal time. In fact, even tomorrow, I'm meeting with a church planner that our church has helped, that I'm meeting with him to solve some problems tomorrow for a lunch. And so we believe in it, but we've really found a way to multiply our movement in a way that's been sustainable and effective and minimize some of the damage. In church planting, when the church plant blows up, there's people that are casualties in that.
Correct.
There's families that are casualties in that. And we've tried to say, how do we multiply our locations and our movement without those casualties? Again, not because those are wrong. We support them and believe in them. And it all comes down, church planting, multi-site, it's going to come down to leadership and how's it done and how is it carried out. And there's great forms of it in both ways. But for us, we have a multi-site model, 70% video, 30% live teaching from our campus pastors, 1 elder board, 1 budget, but multiple sites where everything else, live bands everywhere, live campuses, live hosts and teams, contextualization. We talk a lot about kind of a franchise brand like a Chick-fil-A, but even in a Chick-fil-A, your airport is different than your standalone is different from your mall. They all serve chicken. They all have waffle fries, but the way those get carried out in those spots is different. So we think about that a lot.
Keith, you've just made me hungry for Chick-fil-A, and we also just had a good lunch not too long ago. But just a particular on that. So when they're watching video, is that the same day's sermon? They're watching a live stream or from the previous week?
Yeah. So what we actually do is, because we have Thursday night recording our service, we can take the Thursday night message and use it. We are in the process of the live stream, but to be honest, the live stream comes with it more risks than we have to bear based on the fact that we have Thursday night. Now, there's some other things that the live stream allows that are beneficial. But right now we're using, our weekend sort of starts on Thursday. So I preach, it's recorded, it's captured, and then that goes to the campuses. It also does allow some freedom for me. If, let's say, my family's going to go on vacation on Sunday, I can preach on Thursday. They can show the video, including at the main location on Sunday, and I'm released. We don't leverage that a lot, but we have leveraged it at times as a benefit.
Yeah. And Thursday night service, how long have you been doing that?
Yeah.
That's also an innovation. A lot of churches, few churches would do a Thursday night.
So we did Saturday for years, and we were, when we started to grow, we went to one Saturday, then two Saturday, then we built a bigger building, and it was no Saturday, then back to Saturday. And we just came to where there were some philosophical decisions that drove us to say, we think we need to change. And I don't want to demonize anyone who does Saturday. It served us well. Someday maybe we'll go back. But we felt like it was best for our staff. We felt like it was best for a lot of our best people were like, they were at like a Buckeye game with friends, and then they were maybe reaching people, loving people, connecting to people, and then they leave and go to church. And so we felt like we were pulling some of our best people away. So I don't know, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago at this point that we made that. And it's worked. And again, it'll work if you lead people to it. If you just say you're going to do it, but you don't lead people to it, it won't work. But we led people to it, and it's served us really, really well. And so it's also for people that are in the travel sports world. It's given people another alternative to go. We know we're going to be gone this weekend. We can get to church still. It's given people at our other campuses sometimes. They're going to be out of town. They'll come over to that campus. It creates some interesting rhythms, but it's been good.
Yeah. Would you mind sharing something that you shared this morning? You talked about getting to a point where your church was, because we're still in this conversation of growth, where your church went from 1,200 to 1,201.
Yeah,
and you've had a crisis moment. I don't know, that's overstating it, but tell us about that.
Yeah, it was kind of a significant moment. I'm, I guess, blessed with a pretty good memory. And I can see a scene in a movie, and after seeing it once, almost quote it verbatim. And so that also has moved to, I could see who was in the church. I could track names. I knew names. Well, we were growing. We were growing at a good clip, and we had continued to grow. We got to about 1,200, and I used to literally preach and take attendance while I was preaching and do the math and who's there and they're not there, and I'd write it down, and then I knew who to check in on. And so this one particular time I was preaching, and it was like the room looked impossibly big. And I'm like, I can't do it. I don't know where everyone's at. I can't process it. The room itself spatially was bigger, where people were sitting and all of it. And so I literally came to my elder board, the next elder board meeting, and I said, I have to quit. I said, and they're like, what are you talking about? I said, I can't pastor everybody. And what I felt in my soul was I couldn't get my arms around it. I just couldn't contain it and I don't know if control it, but I just couldn't shepherd it anymore. And they talked me off the ledge and said, hey, let's have a conversation about what this really means. And, but I think all of us come to different moments in ministry where you face aspects of your capacity, and some we come to faster than others, and that's scary. Yeah. And sometimes we come to our capacity completely and we realize I'm not good enough to do that, whatever that is. And that was a moment where I hit a capacity, even with my memory, that I couldn't do it. And I don't know if I was scared or it was the beginning of like feeling like a failure, but I just said, I got to stop. And I'm glad I didn't stop, but that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we also want to just think through mistakes. We all make mistakes as pastors, and not everyone needs to be shared. But if you could think through a mistake or two that you've experienced, like that was an opportunity for you to say, I'm ready to quit. And you had the elders say, no, we're not ready for you to quit. Have there been other times where you're like, I wish I would have done that differently? And what did that look like? So tell us about a mistake.
Yeah. One mistake I think of that I often come back to was I made decisions out of fear. And one of those was the church was growing. And so there was chatter that we needed to, our elder board needed to be bigger. But I kind of knew we didn't have anybody ready, but there was enough chatter and pressure that I caved. And I brought someone on our board. They got voted on, but I ran the process to get them to the board, and they weren't ready. It ended up being God's grace that after a year they self-selected out, and it wasn't a lot of casualty, but it affected our team for that year. And when I look back, it was a decision that I let fear lead it, and that was really hard. And I've obviously had lots of, I don't know if you want to call them micro failures, but the way I talked to someone, the way I led, what felt like a lack of empathy or mercy, those have been really sometimes greater moments than others. There's one particular elder board meeting I remember where we have a plurality of elders. I get one vote, but I felt like they weren't hearing my position well enough. Like I felt like I should have had my weight should have carried more than it was, and it wasn't. And, I don't stand up and say, you guys don't understand, and I sit at the top of the mountain, but I did. And I was like, you don't have my perspective. And if you had my perspective, you would feel the way I feel. And I popped off at the mouth, and I said some things out of pocket. And, not only did I have to be like a Christian, but I had to be very humble in the way that I went back and owned that. And I think doing that has made every other time I've had to do that really easy because I did it, and so there's tactical things from the platform I've said. There's ways I've gone after a campaign that weren't a good idea, but I think fear and then those interpersonal moments of how I might have talked to someone.
Yeah. So recognizing the fear and then reaching out when you realize I was out of line.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so important that we model what we preach, that we're quick to say we're sorry, ask for forgiveness, admit that our emotions got to us on something.
Yeah. Meanwhile, that is why you golf, right? It gives you
Sure. That creates a different set of emotions, though.
This next question goes right along with this conversation, Pastor Keith. As you have growth, there's more eyes on you. And so what are some intentional things, maybe guardrails you've set up in your ministry to ensure that you lead with integrity?
Yeah, I mean, again, back to my own personal relationship with the Lord, that I feel like I'm hearing from Him, that I'm trying to walk in step with the Spirit. Clear permission for my wife to say no's to me. We had a conversation a number of years ago. When your church starts to grow, particularly when my church really started to grow, I'm 45 now, but I was 30, 31, and your church is growing and you're young. So everybody wants to talk to you because you're young and your church wants to grow as your church is growing. And so I was getting a lot of asks. I was getting recruited by a lot of jobs. I had a lot of different places where people wanted me to go. And I proactively went to my elder board and said, what are some lines? What are some rules? And we established those. And those rules became, you are not to do anything outside of those at this point. And those have shifted, but I've had those moments where the elder board has said, you're going to do it. How many boards am I allowed to sit on? Mm-hmm. How many speaking engagements and with who? So my wife gets to speak to those. The board gets to speak to those. My relationship with my executive pastors over the years to look at me and say, hey, too much of you might have gone over there, don't do that, has been real clear. And then, there's a little thing in your own conscience when you start to go, boy, I seem to be out a lot, or I don't know that I would love if somebody else was doing that. At the same time, you're trying to strategically leverage the influence you have.
Sure.
And what does God have for you to say about you, your ministry, the church, and that's useful, that's beneficial to the kingdom? And so you don't want to hoard that. You want to steward that. But so the elders, my wife, myself, every once in a while, my assistant, she doesn't say you're out of line or whatever, but I'll notice like the way she asked the question about my travel. I'm like, she kind of knows I shouldn't be doing this, So those are some things I think that have shown up.
Yeah, you said that the line has shifted since you were 30. You're here in town to do a speaking engagement for the Center for Thriving Leaders. What are some other areas of involvement outside of the local church that you've enjoyed over the past few years, like where you're involved?
Yeah, so I've tried to like lock in and say these are going to be a few. And one of those has become kind of association with Grace College and Grace College endeavors. I sit on the board for Grace College. And so when those things happen, when Grace asks, I feel obliged to step into that to some degree.
Yeah.
Because I've signed up for that. That's been true with some of the things connected with Momentum Ministry Partners. I'm involved in Momentum Pro. I've spoken at the conference a number of years. I've been a part of different engagements where those folks have asked, and I've said yes because of that. There was a season I sat on the Encompass Missions Board. I was one of the things the elders asked me to step off of when I was really busy with some things. I really try to any pastor in my community who asks for time, I try to give it. No matter what the size is, where they're at, I try to invest in that. But then the other thing that's outside of my church would probably be I'm pretty involved in a organization that does basketball, and it manifests itself in coaching my son's AAU team, clinics. Now I coach my oldest son, now I'm coaching my youngest son. But that involves clinics. Sometimes I'll speak at that. There's relationships that have come from that. And so I've stepped into that space recreationally to go, because I love basketball. It's a passion, and it's a way to be around a lot of people that aren't in the church.
Yeah, he's speaking our heart language, isn't he, Trent?
Amen to that.
Yeah, we both do a lot of coaching and
we do
community. Love it. It's a great involvement area.
Want to talk to you, kind of rearranging here just a little bit, but we've got some pastors listening right now, and I think everyone in this room have probably been through this at some point in time. Pastoral burnout.
Sure.
And Keith, how would you speak to some of our Charis family leaders here that are teetering of maybe leaving the ministry, facing burnout? What would you say to them right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're teetering, the first thing is you got to be honest and you got to deal with it. Asking for help isn't weakness; it's strength. Mm. And so, if that's where you're at, I think you got to own it. You got to go talk to people. Obviously, it's one of those things that the goal is not to get there. So how do we do some things on the front end, right? So take your vacations, work with your leadership to create a vacation policy that is rewarded for people taking their vacation. So on our staff, you're not allowed to carry more than 3 days over from a year to year of vacation. And we do that because we want people to take our vacations. I fought it for years, but we build a sabbatical schedule. And we build a sabbatical schedule for any director and above and our staff, and you got to take them. Mm. And those are partially funded, your salary, but you're funded with that. And so sabbatical, finding real respite and asking, what am I doing that recharges me? One of the things I find pastors do is they quit, they don't rest. Mm. And those are not the same.
Well said.
So they shut down, veg out, watch Netflix, and then say, why am I not recharged? The truth is for some guys, you may recharge more building a deck than you will laying on the couch. Mm-hmm. Don't quit, rest. And rest looks different for different people. Recharge, refresh. Be honest about your capacity. Be honest about what you can run and can't run. Everybody can't run the same speed. Everybody can't. I heard a guy say a long time ago, he said, in running, you don't pace yourself with a Kenyan. You don't pace yourself with people who are dispositionally driven to run faster and longer. Figure out where you're supposed to be and run at that, and be okay with that. Some people have higher capacity than you. Some people have lower capacity than you. Figure out who you are. Find real rhythms of your ministry that give you joy. How do you look and see the wins? How do you get excited? You can't run your ministry in fifth gear all the time. So where are the ways you can figure that out? So capitalize on seasons, know where you're at, talk about those rhythms, win at those rhythms, build appropriate things like vacation, sabbatical, patterns in your work week, spend time with God on a regular basis, and then just be honest when you're broken. Be willing to say, I'm tired. I can't do this. I had a situation a number of years ago that was probably less work driven, but it was work driven and then some family like social things. I did a wedding in Indiana from Ohio. I drove late night, left for the wedding, went back, had a thing on a Saturday, did a thing on a Saturday, preached, traveled. My son, for like a rite of passage trip, I was taking him to a Packers game, and we drove to Cleveland to fly out, and then we flew to Milwaukee, and then we drove from Milwaukee, we went to the game, stayed up, went to the game. After the game, it was a Monday night game. We didn't want to get the hotel because we were flying out so early the next morning, so we went to the airport, slept in the airport, got to the airport, drove from Cleveland when we got home back to Columbus. Well, the long story short of that was on Tuesday at my office, I got up feeling like I really felt like I had to throw up, but I said I had to go to the bathroom. I got up and I passed out. And it was probably just fatigue that my body was like, you're dehydrated, stop. And, that was a moment where even it wasn't all work, but physically my body was like, you can't do this, knock it off. And so sometimes we got to listen to our bodies, get sleep. The best thing you might do for your church that night is 8 hours of sleep. Go get it, right? So those are all the things I would say, man. And it's a serious issue. I also want to say the other side. I think sometimes for the fear of burnout, there's a different group of men that don't work hard. And I want to challenge some people who are so cautious about, I'm giving too much to work, and I read that book about not cheating on my family, and that the truth is you're lazy. You don't do your job. You don't run as hard as you can. You're not stewarding the ministry and the resources you have well. So just as much as we need to be aware of the side that says don't burn out, there's another group of people that I want to look at and say, work hard, earn your wages, steward the resources God has given the people through, to your church through the people, and work hard, because I think it's a very dangerous testimony for people in ministry not to be hard workers.
Amen. Athletically, you mentioned coaching. I coach middle school football. And sometimes we've had some games where our students weren't in school. And what I have noticed is if I've got football players just sitting around doing nothing all day, sitting on the couch, and then they come out to play a game that night, they're flat.
Yeah, it's hard to get them up.
It is. Yeah. So I'll tell them, encourage them. I mean, I don't want you doing, 6-rep workouts in the weight room or anything, but jump some rope, do something. Just don't sit around all day, because you will come out flat. Same thing. We need to work hard. We need to have some balance. But you're exactly right. I think sometimes we read some of the material and it gives an excuse for people to be lazy. Totally agree.
The word is load management in the sports world, and knowing when to rest and when to work. And there's a book called The Sleep Revolution by Arianna Huffington, and it opens with a story that almost sounds akin to what you just described, where she's running to this thing, that thing, that thing, that thing, and they were all good things. Everything you described there sounded awesome.
Yeah.
And then she passed out and cracked her head open on a desk. That's not awesome.
Yeah, sure.
It's finding when is that, going back to the early part of our conversation about things with your spouse. One of the things that Liz and I have stumbled upon recently is just this idea of a pause. we're in the phase of life, and you're in this a little bit too, Trent, where you're just driving your kids around a lot. When they get that license, that's cool and exciting, but a little scary too. But like when you're in the car together, you get a lot of quality time, but you're like, this thing, that thing, that thing. And then you get out of the car and you go. And
we usually see each other dropping our kids off at school together.
We do often. But like my wife and I have gotten to this habit where sometimes we park and we take a breath for a minute or two. And something about that, like 1 minute rest. So we don't need to sleep all day long. We don't need like long vacations every other month, but we do need to learn how to pause, how to breathe, how to reestablish some rhythms in our heart, our mind, and our soul, and our body. And that actually takes us to the last part of our conversation.
Before we go there, can I just interject one thing? I think one other thing that I would say about this is, in the process of burnout, ministry fatigue, stress, one thing I would encourage ministry leaders to look out for is the moment where you've started to compromise on lines that you never would have compromised on before with the ways you might be self-medicating. So I watch some guys, they don't get to burnout, but they just get to failure. And they get to failure because whatever policies and rules they had about what they were allowed to watch, they've suddenly shifted in the name of escapism. Whatever policies or processes they had about alcohol, they shifted because in the name of escapism or numbing or whatever it is. Whatever habits they had about working out or not. And so I think one of the things on the ministry health burnout side is asking myself, am I allowing myself some unhealthy things that the 6 year ago version of me would have never allowed?
Well said.
I would have very clearly said, that's a line I'm not crossing. And yet I've told myself the new story that the stress and the wear and tear and the challenge has made it acceptable to do that. And, there's these moments of maybes in our life that end up destroying us. But sometimes it's not just the moment of maybe, it's what built us to the moment of maybe. And there's a lot of guys that they end up out of ministry, they end up burned out, because again, most of us, these moments are not light switches, they're dimmer switches.
Correct.
And they're dimmer switches that happen in the slow progression of going, I had this policy around that type of whatever. And suddenly I've said, hey, it's okay. I think back to, I was a young parent and I'll never let my kid, do this thing. And then 10 years later, you're letting your kid do the thing. And sometimes you're right to let them do it. Other times you caved. You were actually right 10 years ago.
Yeah. And
you caved because you didn't want to have the fight and have the conviction anymore. And now you've introduced things that are dangerous. I think that happens with ministry leaders. They invite things they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Well said.
Let's talk about marks of a healthy leader then. And we could talk about the burnout side.
Yeah.
But there've got to be healthy rhythms in place. And one of those critical areas would be your relationship to Jesus. We give from the overflow. And I wonder if maybe you're not a person who approaches a new year just kind of like looking for a word from God or something that drives you forward. And I'm not looking for something for your church necessarily, but something for you, Keith, as a leader, as a pastor, as a follower of Jesus. What's a theme God's placed on your heart, whether it's for 2024 or just more recently? Yeah.
So two big concepts that I felt like 2024, the Lord really wanted me to think about on a personal level. One was being a better celebrator of other people's victories. Like, I'm happy your kid played great, not just happy my kid played great. And I've never been unhappy your kid played great per se, but I don't think I've done a great job at demonstrating that I'm happy that your kid played great, whoever your kid and whatever it is. And so what does it really look like to say, I'm going to lift your arms for your victory? It has been something that's been on my mind this year. And then the second thing is, this is a big word for me based on the way I'm wired, but really trying to be more gentle, really trying to be tender, in the way that I approach you in a thing. Most people who know me are not going to say Keith's problem is clarity or passion or even correctness, like he's right. But they are going to say sometimes it can be rough. And so what does it look like to be more gentle? And then for our church, we do have something. We really felt like this was the year, as we look back towards what COVID did to us, the natural inertia of any organization is internalize. It is to become internally focused and survive. COVID put all of us on this kind of like triage. How do we make sure we're alive and go?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we would say is that our external eyes are atrophying. And if you don't deal with atrophy, it becomes a disability. So we really said that our focus for 2024 is external eyes. And that manifests itself in evangelism, caring for other people, seeing problems, thinking about the globe. But we really feel like this is a year we've got to get after that in a way that we've atrophied in.
Yeah. That theme of gentleness I've heard come up a few times recently, so I'm thinking of that as a sacred echo, being this thing that God keeps bringing before you. But we're about to talk with the men at our church about being gentlemen, not like a weird British sort of way, but like,
yeah, sure,
that's a fruit of the Spirit.
Sure.
Pastor Keith, you've accomplished a lot of things in ministry. You've seen some great growth. All of us, we want some fulfillment when we get out of bed, especially as guys. We want to be fulfilled. We want to achieve. What are still some ministry goals that you'd like to accomplish?
Yeah, I think one of them is maybe it's kind of the end. Like I would want to finish well, whatever that is. I wouldn't want to have flamed out or stayed in my position too long. I'd want to finish well. I want to continue to develop great communicators who I feel like can teach the Word of God well and do it in their context and reproduce that well. I want to set whoever follows me in my chair up to do better than I've done. So I want to set them up to win. How they steward that opportunity is their choice, but I want to be able to look in the mirror and say, I did that really, really, really well. I want to finish the season of getting my kids through my home with, my two youngest being 9. But then I want to ask really uniquely, what does God want for my wife and I in that next season, in terms of our house and our time? And, the busiest thing in my life is not my big church, it's my 4 kids. And so,
Amen.
Right? And so some people say, yeah, ministry's killing you. No, 4 kids is killing me. And so when they're, Lord willing, chasing the Lord and living their life, doing their thing, what are we going to do with some of the things that we have in front of us? So I want to figure that out. And I think the last thing is I want to make sure that our church continues to always be willing to change where it needs to change. Early on, it was really easy to not care about if we changed because there was nothing to protect. There's a lot to protect now. There's a big risk in things. And so the change management is significant, but I want to always keep that spirit that will change for mission.
Thank you.
What would you say is a limitation right now that you are, or maybe limitation, weakness, capacity that you're learning to embrace at this season of life?
The fact that I can't build as much credibility and trust with everyone as I would like to, because that takes time and conversations, and I'm finite. So it's not that the influence to make the call is limited. It's the comfort that those people feel good about it because they've spent the time with me to embrace that the same way. So the limitation of the finite nature of my time is big. Physical liabilities. A number of years ago, I ripped my Achilles. I broke my Liz Frank bone. Those things shifted my back out of whack. Those, you don't sleep the way sugar affects you differently. You're older. And that is a real limitation that you feel in spaces of like, oh, this flight might bother me. I never thought about that before. I didn't care. There's real physical limitations, and that's annoying, but it's real. And so, I'm on about 5 hours sleep right now. That will feel different on the way home. And I don't love that, so that's real. And then I think the limitation of the limitation of you have established who you are, and some of that you're not going to break. And I don't mean character, like I've established some rhythms about the way I go about some stuff that at this point they're kind of for better or worse. And that makes you realize there's some things you'll never be.
Yeah.
So
real quickly as we conclude here, Pastor Keith, I know we need to get you on the road. What's a couple spiritual practices that have been most helpful for you?
Yeah, I'll just mention two. One is a prayer journal.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun to be able to go back and look and see what's been answered. So I have a little black book that I, write them in.
Just to go back and see what God has done.
Totally.
Yeah.
And also sometimes to see on the things that I haven't even crossed out, though, what's been done through those or about those. The other one is two simple words. This is something I heard, 18, 20 months ago. And they're the words invite and investigate or inspect, invite and inspect. And this is the idea of every day before I get out of bed saying, God, I invite you into this day. And sometimes there's very specific things. So today, God, I'm giving some talks to these guys, these leaders. I invite you into that. I got to have a hard conversation with staff. I invite you into that. I have Kel and I invite you into that, kids. But I invite you. Just really posturing in the morning. I think sometimes we need to be honest that the scripture talks about the value of the morning in terms of the way we posture our day. So starting with invite and then getting to the end of the day and inspecting what happened. So God, I invited you into that thing today. I'm going to stop and investigate and inspect what happened on that. And I tell you what, I've done that for about 20 months. I can't tell you that I've done it every day, but I'm doing it a lot. And there's so much growth from it. So much growth from it. Because it's allowing me to express dependence, need, wonder, excitement for the Lord on the front end, and then come to the end and see what happened.
Amen.
And so it's a little bit of like crossing the Jordan at the end of the day and putting the rocks out and saying, he did that. And so it's two simple words. It's invite and inspect. And it's been a really helpful rhythm. And I can tell you it's also been a very easy discipleship practice to teach other people. So I can't tell you how many times over breakfast I've told people, I want you just to start inviting and inspecting. And it's been great.
Good message.
I like that. There's something called the prayer of examine that people practice at the end of the day, and it's a prayerful review of their day, and it sounds very similar. But instead of going to tomorrow's worries, let's stop with today's blessing.
Sure.
And that's
great.
Sounds like what you're doing, man. Thank you, God. Thank you, God, for this today. We usually end with a question. I'm going to actually dispense with that question, and I'm going to repeat something you said in our training today with Thriving Center leaders. You said, I love Jesus. I love him so much. And I just want to reiterate that came out of your heart today. And I want to say to you that he loves you more.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want to leave you with today.
Thanks.
I know you love him and you love him so much. He loves you more.
Thanks, man. I do. I hope amidst the big church and the numbers and the blah, 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 that people know I really love the Lord. And I'm super grateful. And I appreciate your words to be reminded of how he feels about me.
For sure. Thanks for being with us today.
Glad to.
The conversation has been rich and such a blessing. I have to say before we conclude today, I'm still wrestling. I am just slightly upset about the blue wave. And Keith, what do you think? Are our Buckeyes, are they going to be back next year?
I'm hoping. I definitely think it is Mr. Day's seat is quite on fire. And given what has happened in both recruiting and the transfer portal, if he doesn't figure out how to win some significant games, including the game, I think we'll be looking for a new coach.
We need the game back. Well said.
For sure.
Pastor Keith, what an absolute pleasure to have you and be with you today, and just your interpretation that you've left here at the campus of Grace College and Seminary. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
This is Dr. Trent Lambert from the Center for Thriving Leaders at Grace Theological Seminary and Pastor Tim Sprankle from Leesburg Grace Church. Thanks for listening to our conversation with Pastor Keith Manier.
The More of Us podcast recognizes that we are not alone. We lead best when we walk with others. So join us for more of these talks by subscribing today. God bless.